Imagine a dusty town square where human cruelty dresses up as normalcy. Imagine a woman with a sack covering her face, tied up like cattle, being sold for coins that would barely buy a bag of flour. Now imagine a man who hadn't smiled in 7 years, a mountain hermit who held on to pain like someone holding embers under ashes, offering $12, not to buy, but to free. This is the story of how an act of unexpected compassion transformed shame into dignity, silence into a home, and despair into a freedom that no paper or chain could ever steal again. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching us from? What city, what corner of the world brought you to this story today? And if this narrative touches your heart as I hope it will, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Every gesture of yours helps us continue sharing stories that matter, stories that remind us of what it means to be human. Autumn 1878, Cedar Ridge, Colorado Rocky Mountains. Autumn of 1878 had arrived in the Rocky Mountains with its crown of gold and rust, painting the aspens with cold fingers that announced the coming winter. Cedar Ridge, a small rough town nestled between stone peaks and broken promises, woke up under a slate-colored sky, a harbinger of snow. Ezra Cole descended the winding trail that cut through the mountain like an ancient scar. It had been 4 months since his last descent into civilization, 4 months of feeding himself with what he hunted, drinking from the spring that emerged behind his solitary cabin, speaking only with the silence and the memories that haunted him like a persistent fog. At 44, Ezra had the body of someone who knew hard work and the soul of someone who had buried joy along with his wife 7 winters ago. Since Clara had closed her eyes for the last time, defeated by the tuberculosis that had consumed her like frost consumes fragile flowers, Ezra hadn't smiled. There was no reason. His needs were simple: salt, flour, coffee, gunpowder, the basics to survive until winter passed, and he could once again ignore the existence of other human beings. He descended not out of desire, but out of necessity, like a wounded animal dragging itself in search of water. The central square of Cedar Ridge, with its broken fountain and its wooden buildings that creaked in the wind like old bones, was strangely busy for a Tuesday morning. A cluster of men, some with dirty hats, others with work-stained suspenders, formed a semicircle in front of Luther Briggs's general store. Harsh laughter cut through the cold air, the kind of laughter not born of joy, but of cruelty that finds an audience. Ezra tied up his horse and walked toward the store, intending to bypass the crowd. But something made his feet stop. Something in the quality of that laughter. Something in the silence that hid between them. "Come on, gentlemen." Luther Briggs's voice, oily as old lard, rose above the murmur. "Last chance. Hair-strong woman, good for heavy work. Who'll give more than $5? Ezra pushed his way through the men, and he saw, in the center of the square on a makeshift platform of crates, a woman stood, tall, broad-shouldered, hands tied in front of her body, and over her head, a burlap sack, the kind used for flour or potatoes. The dirt of the coarse fabric was stained, where Ezra imagined her mouth breathed. But what paralyzed him was not the cruelty of the scene, it was her posture. Even tied up, even with her head covered like an animal for slaughter, the woman kept her spine straight. There was something fierce in that stillness, something that refused the shame they were trying to impose on her. $5 is too much for returned goods," someone shouted. 3, 2, and I'm being generous. More laughter. Luther Briggs, a fat man with a sparse mustache and pig-like eyes, wiped the sweat from his forehead despite the cold. "Gentlemen, gentlemen, be reasonable." The previous suitor returned her only because, well, he lowered his voice in a theatrical conspiracy. "They say she has the devil's mark. But for hard work, there's no one better." The woman didn't move. She didn't beg. She didn't lower her head. And it was that, more than anything else, that made something inside Ezra break. Something that had been frozen for 7 years began to crack, like ice under the spring sun. $12. His own voice surprised him, hoarse from disuse but firm. Silence fell over the square like a sudden snowfall. Everyone turned. The Hermit. The ghost of the mountain. The man who hadn't come down to the city in months, who didn't talk to anyone, who had buried his wife and with her any trace of warm humanity. "Ezra Cole?" Luther Briggs blinked. "Did you say $12? Ezra repeated louder. "Is there anyone who'll give more?" No one spoke. Samuel Morrison, the blacksmith, one of the few men Ezra respected, opened his mouth as if to protest, but then he closed it. His eyes, as gentle as his craft was brutal, met Ezra's, and something passed between them, a silent understanding. Luther Briggs counted the coins twice, as if he didn't believe his luck. He handed Ezra yellowed papers, documents that were intended to turn a soul into property. Ezra took them without looking. "She's all yours, Cole. No returns." Briggs laughed, a fat and obscene sound. Ezra stepped onto the platform. The woman tensed but did not retreat. He could see her accelerated breathing moving the burlap sack. Fear. Of course, there was fear, but also preparation, as if she were ready to fight, even tied up, even blinded by the rough fabric. Ezra took the knife from his belt. The crowd murmured, but instead of threatening, he cut the ropes that bound her wrists. The rope fell heavily to the ground, and Ezra saw the red marks and dried blood where the knot had tightened the flesh. "You can come with me," he said softly, just for her. "Or you can go wherever you want. The choice is yours." Under the sack he heard a shaky breath, then a voice, hoarse, as if she had screamed until she could no more, or as if she had been silent for too long. "Where to?" "Away from here," she nodded. A small but definite movement. And when Ezra offered his hand to help her down from the platform, she took it. Her fingers were calloused, rough as tree bark, fingers that knew work, pain, and survival. As they walked through the silent crowd toward Ezra's horse, no one spoke. But he felt the looks, judgment, curiosity, contempt. It didn't matter. None of that mattered. Samuel Morrison approached as Ezra helped the woman mount. "Do you know what you're doing, Cole?" he asked quietly. "No," Ezra admitted, "but I know what I'm not doing, and that's letting this happen." Samuel nodded. He briefly touched Ezra's shoulder, a gesture of silent solidarity. Then he walked away. Ezra mounted behind the woman, keeping a respectful distance. He touched the reins and the horse began to walk. The burlap sack still covered her head, but as they left Cedar Ridge behind, climbing the trail toward the mountains where the air was thinner and the silence deeper, Ezra noticed that she kept her chin up. And for the first time in 7 years, he wondered if compassion, like a seed sleeping under the snow, could still germinate in soil he thought was dead forever. The trail climbed in lazy spirals up the pine-covered slopes, narrowing until only one horse could pass at a time. The air grew colder with every meter gained, sharp as a blade against the skin. Above, the sky descended in shades of lead, promising snow before nightfall. Ezra guided the horse with hands that knew every curve, every loose stone, every exposed root. 3 hours of climbing, 3 hours of silence broken only by the crackling of twigs under the hooves and the whisper of the wind through the conifers. The woman in front of him remained motionless, as rigid as green wood. The burlap sack still covered her head. Ezra had not tried to remove it. It was not his right. She would take it off when she was ready, if she stayed at all. They passed a stream that cut through the slope like a silver vein. The water sang over smooth stones, an ancient and indifferent song to human suffering. Ezra stopped to give the horse water. He offered his canteen to the woman. She hesitated, then accepted drinking without removing the sack, tilting her head back so that the water could run down the lower opening. Her hands, now free from the ropes, trembled slightly, but when she returned the canteen, her voice was firm. Why? The question carried the weight of a mountain. Why he bought her. Why he freed her. Why he brought her to an unknown place. Why a stranger would show kindness when the world had taught her only cruelty. Ezra put away the canteen. He looked at the mountains that rose around them, ancient peaks that had witnessed countless human lives blossom and disappear like summer flowers. "It didn't seem Christian to me," he finally said. She made a sound that could have been laughter, if laughter could carry so much bitterness. "Christian," she repeated. "Half of those men go to church on Sundays. Then they're not Christians. They're just cowards who need an audience." Silence. Then softer. "You don't know what you bought. I didn't buy anything." Ezra took up the reins again. "I just paid to get you out of that hell. Tomorrow, if you want, you can leave. I'll show you the trail that leads to the West Valley. There's a city there, Denver City, bigger, maybe less." He searched for the word. "Less cruel. And if I don't want to leave, then you stay. As long as it's your choice." They continued to climb. The sun was beginning to slide behind the peaks when Ezra's cabin finally appeared in the clearing. Solid, built with thick logs cut from the mountain itself, the roof covered with clay and straw. Smoke did not rise from the stone chimney. Ezra had been away for months, but the structure remained firm, resisting the winds that swept the clearing like giant hands. In the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely, almost melancholy sound. The woman tensed. "Don't worry." Ezra dismounted, offered his hand again. "They don't come down here. They have their own lands, their own paths." She accepted his help, dismounting carefully. Her legs wavered. 3 hours of riding after how long tied up? But she recovered quickly, steadying herself with a determination that Ezra recognized. the determination of someone who had learned never to show weakness. He opened the cabin door, the smell of wood, leather, and absence. He lit a lamp, then knelt before the fireplace, building a fire with the efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times. The flames licked the dry wood, crackling. Golden light filled the single space. A pine bed in one corner, a rough table and 2 chairs, shelves with cans and jars, a rifle over the fireplace, a pile of furs. Simple, clean, a place that did not expect visitors. The woman remained near the door, still with the sack on her head, waiting, always waiting for the violence she had learned to anticipate. "May I?" Ezra asked, approaching slowly. "The sack. May I take it off?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, so light it was almost lost in the crackling of the fire. "You may." Ezra untied the knot at the base of her neck. The rough fabric fell, and he saw. The first thing Ezra noticed was not the scar, although it cut across her face like a frozen lightning bolt from her left temple to her jaw. It was not the dark brown hair cut irregularly, close to the scalp in some places, uneven as if blunt scissors had attacked it. It wasn't even the prominent cheekbones or the square jaw that gave her a strong, almost masculine structure. It was her eyes. The left was dark brown as deep as wet earth, the right amber green with golden flecks that caught the firelight like gems. Heterochromia. Ezra knew the term. He had seen it once in a cat, in a mare. But in a human person, there was something unsettling, not because it was ugly, but because it was different. And difference, he knew, invited fear in those who needed the world to fit into small, safe categories. She stared at him without looking down, defiant, expecting the recoil, the rejection, the horror, expecting him to ask for his money back. "Ruth," she said, her voice still hoarse. "Just Ruth. I don't have a last name worth mentioning." "Ezra Cole," he replied. "Welcome to my home, Ruth." She blinked, then blinked again, as if the words were a foreign language she needed to translate. "You're not going to—" "What? Scream? Call a priest?" Ezra moved away, giving her space. "I've lived 36 years, Ruth. I've seen men do things that no demon could imagine. And I've seen kindness in places that no church would bless. Different eyes just mean you see the world from a unique perspective. Maybe it's a blessing, not a curse." She ran a trembling hand through her mangled hair, an almost unconscious gesture. Her fingers were long, calloused with short, clean nails despite everything. Hands that had worked, hands that had survived. "How old are you?" Ezra asked, moving to put water on the fire for tea. 36. Maybe 37. I lost count a few years ago. Almost contemporaries then. 2 people worn out by decades of loss and struggle. "Are you hungry?" "Always." The answer came too quickly. Then she closed her mouth as if she had revealed a dangerous vulnerability. Ezra prepared a simple meal. Day-old bread softened in dried meat broth, boiled potatoes, strong tea from herbs that grew on the mountain. He placed it all before her. Ruth hesitated as if expecting a trick. Then she ate. Slowly at first, then with the urgency of someone who didn't know when she would eat again. Ezra pretended not to notice. He ate his own portion, giving her the privacy of her hunger. When they finished, he collected the plates and washed them in the basin. Then he took the papers Briggs had given him from his pocket. Ruth watched with her uneven eyes that did not blink. "These documents," Ezra extended them toward the fire. "They say you belong to me, that I can do whatever I want. Forced labor, punishment, worse things that I won't name." She didn't answer. She just waited. "I'm going to burn them, now, in front of you, because no paper has the right to turn a person into property. And if it's a trick," her voice was pure exhaustion, "what if you're waiting for me to lower my guard, trust you, and then nothing?" Ezra threw the papers into the fire. The flames devoured them, curling the yellowed edges into orange embers until only ashes remained. "My word is you are free. You can leave tomorrow or stay as long as you want. You can sleep knowing that I won't hurt you. You can believe it or doubt it. It's your right. But that's my truth." Ruth looked at the ashes dancing up the chimney. Then she looked at Ezra, really looked, as if trying to read the wrinkles around his eyes, his calloused hands, his unthreatening posture. "Men don't show kindness without expecting something," she finally said. "What do you want?" "Nothing you don't want to give. My word." Ezra pointed to the bed. "Sleep. I'll lock the door against the cold, not against you. You can unlock it from the inside. I'll sleep here by the fire. Tomorrow we'll talk about what comes next." She still hesitated, but exhaustion weighed on her like wet snow. Finally she nodded. She walked to the bed, lay down on top of the quilt without taking off her boots. Ezra then saw that she was holding something in her hands, a sharpened piece of wood, improvised into a weapon. She had slept with it throughout the ride, hidden in the folds of her shabby dress. Smart, he commented softly. Keep it. There's a real knife in the drawer next to the bed if you prefer. Surprise flashed in those disparate eyes. Then, slowly, something that could have been the beginning of trust. Ezra curled up in a bearskin by the fire. He heard her breathing change, deepening as sleep finally took her. But even in her sleep, she maintained a tense posture, a body that had never learned to relax completely. The fire crackled. The wind howled in the cracks, and Ezra stayed awake for a long time, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling, wondering what demons Ruth had faced to turn her into a woman who slept with an improvised weapon and expected betrayal with every kindness. But he wouldn't ask, not yet. Stories of pain came when they were ready. Forcing them was an additional cruelty. For now it was enough that she slept, knowing that tonight at least no one would hurt her. Dawn came cold and crystalline, painting the distant peaks in pink and gold. Ezra woke up first, as always, and was surprised to see the bed empty. For a moment he thought Ruth had left during the night, but then he heard sounds coming from outside, wood being split with rhythmic precision. He opened the door and found her in the small courtyard, axe raised, bringing it down with a controlled force that split the logs cleanly. She had already accumulated a considerable pile. Her shabby dress was tied at the waist with a rope, revealing strong, muscular arms. Sweat glistened on her forehead despite the cold. You don't have to," Ezra began. "I have to," she cut him off, not stopping. "I don't accept charity. I don't sleep under a man's roof without paying for the privilege. If I'm going to stay, I'm going to work. Ruth, no." The axe came down again. "Understand this from the start, Cole. I will no longer be a passive object, waiting for others to decide my fate. I can split wood, cook, hunt if I have a rifle, fix the roof, milk a cow, take care of a horse, even shoot a wolf if necessary. Choose whatever you want, but don't ask me to sit here while you do everything." Ezra studied her. The morning sun illuminated the scar on her face, but it also illuminated the fierce determination that burned in those different eyes. This was not a woman who would accept protection that seemed like pity. This was a survivor who had turned her forced fragility into tempered steel. "All right," he nodded. "You can take care of the wood. I'll hunt. You'll cook. We'll both keep the place in order. A partnership, not charity." She stopped, the axe suspended in the air. She turned to face him completely. "Partnership," she repeated, testing the word like someone testing thin ice. "So I'm free to leave?" "You always were. And you don't want anything?" The question carried layers of meaning that Ezra preferred not to unravel. "I want quiet company. Someone who doesn't demand conversation when there's nothing to say. Someone who understands that solitude is sometimes a choice, not a curse. If you can offer that, it's more than enough payment." Ruth lowered the axe. For a long moment she just watched him. Then she nodded once, definitively. The following days established a rhythm. Ruth would wake up before the sun, light the fire, prepare strong coffee that cut through the morning cold like a sharp knife. Ezra would hunt rabbits and occasional deer, partridges. She would clean the game with an efficiency that revealed practice, wasting nothing. She cooked thick stews that warmed from the inside out. She mended his clothes with small, precise stitches. She organized the shelves with a logic he had never had. On the third day, he offered her the old rifle that had belonged to Clara. "Do you know how to use it?" Ruth took the weapon, checked it with a familiarity that spoke more than words. She put it to her shoulder, aimed at a distant tree. She fired. The bullet hit the center of the trunk, exactly where he had imagined she had aimed. "Who taught you?" Ezra asked, impressed. "No one. Necessity teaches faster than a teacher." She reloaded. "Everything useful I have I learned because I needed to survive." She would go out hunting alone sometimes. She would return with rabbits, once with a small wild boar. She moved through the forest like a shadow, silent and lethal. Ezra realized that she never wasted a movement. Every gesture had a purpose, an economy of energy of someone who had learned that strength was a limited resource. At night, they would sit in comfortable silence. Ezra would clean his weapons. Ruth would mend or read. He had been surprised to discover that she could read, though slowly, spelling out difficult words. She had taken Clara's old Bible, not out of devotion, he suspected, but because it was the only book available. On the 10th night, while a strong wind shook the walls and snow began to fall outside, Ruth spoke for the first time about herself beyond immediate needs. "You asked who taught me," she said, without looking up from the cloth she was mending. "No one taught me because no one cared enough to teach. I learned by watching. I learned by making mistakes. I learned by getting beaten when I made mistakes." A pause. "You seem to be expecting me to tell my story. Only if you want to. And if I don't, then you don't tell it. Everyone's story is their own to keep or share. She finally looked at him. Her needle stopped in midair. 10 years, she said. 10 years serving a man who thought that money bought souls. That a signed contract turned a person into a thing. That scar? She touched her face. That was when I finally said no. When I refused to be more than a servant. He didn't like it. Men like him never like it when their property dares to have a will of its own. Ezra let the silence breathe between them. Then his name? Why? Her eyes shone with something dangerous. Are you going to go down the mountain and seek justice? There is no justice for women like me, Cole. The law protects men with money and property. Women, we're just clauses in contracts. Maybe, but knowing the names of demons helps to face them if they return. She studied him for a long moment. Then, as soft as falling snow, Silas Brennan, Double Cross Ranch, 10 years of my life. And if it weren't for you, it would have been 10 more for anyone else who bought me like they buy cattle. Ezra nodded. He memorized the name. Then he went back to cleaning his rifle. Ruth resumed her mending, but something had changed. Something as light as the first spring breeze, but undeniable. She had told. He had listened. And between the telling and the listening, an invisible thread had been woven, not of obligation or possession, but of something rarer, mutual respect. Outside, the snow fell more heavily. Winter had arrived, and with it, the first breath of something that, in time, could become trust. 2 weeks passed on the mountain. Winter deepened, covering the world in a silent white. Ruth blossomed in a subtle way. The rigidity in her shoulders loosened slightly. She sometimes smiled, small smiles, almost imperceptible, but there, and one night, Ezra heard her humming softly while she cooked. But peace, he knew, was a fragile flower in a garden full of storms. It was the 3rd week of November, when Marshal Hank Wheeler and 2 deputies came up the trail. Ezra saw them from the window, 3 horsemen against the snow, the breath of men and animals forming white clouds in the cold air. His heart tightened. "Ruth," he called softly. "We have visitors." She got up from the table where she was peeling potatoes. The knife in her hand tightened instinctively. Then it relaxed. She placed it on the table with deliberate care and straightened her shoulders, preparing herself. Wheeler was a fair man, as far as the law allowed for justice, in his 50s with graying hair and eyes tired of seeing too much of human nature. He greeted Ezra with a nod, then turned to Ruth. "Miss Ruth Ann Carson," he said formally, "I come at the request of Silas Brennan, who has filed a formal complaint of breach of contract, escape from indentured servitude, and theft of property valued at $50. Ruth did not flinch. She faced the marshal with her chin held high. "I violated a contract that treated me like a slave. I fled from a captivity that no law should allow, and I stole nothing but my own life," Wheeler sighed. He took some papers from his inside coat pocket. "I have here a contract signed in 1868, 10 years of servitude, in exchange for the settlement of a $300 debt, witnessed by the former sheriff, legal before the territorial law." "Legal," Ruth repeated, and the word sounded like a spit. "Legal to tie a 16-year-old girl to her dead father's debt. Legal to beat her when she dares to complain. Legal to cut her face when she refuses to be more than a servant." She touched her scar. "Is this mark legal, Marshal?" The deputies exchanged uncomfortable glances. Wheeler seemed to age years in seconds. "I'm obliged to bring you to Cedar Ridge for a hearing. The law is the law even when we don't like it." That's when Ezra spoke. "This here is Mrs. Ezra Cole, legally married wife. I know the territorial law of 1877, Marshal. A married woman cannot be claimed under a previous servitude contract. The husband assumes any debts but also gains legal protection over his wife." Wheeler blinked. Then a tiny smile touched his tired lips. "When did you get married?" 20 days ago. "I can get the records." Ezra began the lie. "No need," Wheeler interrupted him. "I came looking for a fugitive, but I don't see a fugitive here. I only see Mrs. Cole and her husband on their private property." "Marshal," one of the deputies protested. "What?" Wheeler turned. "Did you see a marriage certificate? Because I didn't. And without proof to the contrary, I'll take the word of an honorable man. Ezra Cole is known as such." Ruth looked between the men, trying to understand the game being played. Wheeler approached her, lowered his voice. "Ma'am, I'm obliged to follow the law, but the law has loopholes. Use them. Go to Cedar Ridge tomorrow. Register your marriage at the clerk's office. Then come back here and live in peace. I'll make sure Brennan knows there's nothing left to claim, and he'll accept it." Ruth asked, skeptical. "I have no doubt he'll try something. Men like Brennan don't accept losing property they consider theirs." Wheeler held her shoulder briefly. "That's why I recommend you arm yourselves well, and have friends nearby." After the men had left down the trail, Ruth and Ezra stood at the door, watching them disappear among the snowy pines. "Marriage," Ruth finally said. "Are you willing to tie your name to mine?" "My name was already tied to yours the moment I paid those $12. The rest is just paper. Paper that makes me your wife, legally." She turned to face him. "Do you know what that means?" "The rights you'd have over me?" "I know." Ezra met those different eyes. "And I swear I'll never use one of them. It will be a marriage of protection, not possession. When Brennan is just a memory and you are truly free, you can leave. The paper can be torn as easily as it was made. And if I don't want to leave..." The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities that neither of them was ready to name. "Then you stay. As a partner. As a friend. As whatever you choose to be, but always as a free person." Ruth nodded slowly. Then she held out her hand. "Partners, then. In paper and purpose." Ezra shook her hand. Calloused against calloused. Two survivors sealing a deal that they both knew was more complicated than any legal contract could capture. The next day they went down to Cedar Ridge together. The clerk's office was warm, smelling of ink and old paper. The clerk, a small man who wore thick glasses, asked no questions beyond the necessary ones. He registered. Ezra Cole and Ruth Ann Carson, legally married. When they left, Ruth looked at the paper that made her a wife. "Paper that once bound me has now freed me," she murmured. "Strange how words on a page have so much power." "It's not the words," Ezra said. "It's what we choose to do with them." And as they rode back to the mountain, Ruth folded the paper carefully and kept it close to her heart. Not because it represented love, but because it represented choice. And choice, for someone who had lived 10 years without one, was the most precious of gifts. The attack came with the snow. Ezra had woken up before dawn, that War Scout's instinct that never really sleeps buzzing at the base of his skull. Something was wrong. Something in the silence that shouldn't have been silent. He got up without making a sound, grabbed his rifle. Ruth was already awake, sitting on the bed with the knife in her hands. "Did you feel it too?" she whispered. "Yes, 9 horsemen." Ezra counted them through the crack in the window, as the sky lightened to a pale grey. Led by a burly man in an expensive fur coat, Silas Brennan. Even without ever having seen him, Ezra recognized him. There was something in the man's posture, in the way the others moved around him, that screamed dominance and cruelty. "Ezra Cole," Brennan's voice cut through the cold air. "I know you're in there with my stolen property." "Hand her over and you'll live!" Ruth positioned herself by the window with the 12-gauge shotgun. Her different eyes were calm-cold. There was no fear there, only deadly resolve. "Property!" Brennan shouted again. 10 years of contract. Her marriage paper is worth nothing. She's mine until December." Ezra didn't answer. He just checked the weapons, counted the ammunition, looked at the reinforcements that in recent weeks he had added to the cabin. Thick wooden shutters. Wet clay on the roof. A small arsenal he had kept from his days in the army. He had expected this. Men like Brennan didn't give up. The first shot shattered the window. For 3 hours the cabin was under siege. Bullets embedded themselves in the walls. They tried to set the roof on fire, but Ezra's wet clay didn't allow the flames to catch. Ruth shot with terrifying precision. Every shot counted, every one mattered. Ezra saw the training there, the coolness under pressure. She had not been born with this. She had been forged in it. A man tried to break down the door. Ezra shot through the wood. The man fell. Not dead. Ezra never aimed to kill if he could avoid it, but wounded enough not to try again. That's when they heard it. Hooves. Many hooves. Caleb Stone and his mountain hunters came down like an avalanche. 15 men who knew these lands as well as the peaks knew them. Ezra had sent a smoke signal 2 days before, asking them to be on the lookout. They came, the battle turned. Brennan's gunmen, surprised, retreated. 2 tried to flee. 3 surrendered. Brennan himself, seeing his advantage evaporate, spurred his horse. "No!" Ruth shouted. She ran out of the cabin, rifle raised. Ezra shouted for her to stop, but she didn't listen. She ran through the snow, chasing the man who had stolen 10 years of her life. Brennan looked back, saw her, laughed. A woman couldn't catch a galloping horse. Ruth stopped. She aimed. She fired. The horse fell, not dead, but its fractured leg could no longer support it. Brennan flew through the air, landed hard. He groaned. His leg bent at an impossible angle. Ruth got there first. She pointed the rifle at his head. 10 years. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with compressed anger finally released. "You stole 10 years from me. 10 years of my life, my youth, my peace. I should kill you. It would be justice." Brennan spat blood. "Which strange-eyed demon? They'll hang you for this." "They won't." Ezra came up behind her, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Because you're going to write something, Brennan. Caleb approached with paper and a pen. They forced Brennan under the aim of 15 rifles to write a complete release of Ruth from the contract, an acknowledgement of the abuses, a request for forgiveness that Ezra knew was a lie, but that would be useful legally. And my sister, Ruth added, her voice firm. Ada Carson. Where is she? Brennan laughed, a horrible sound through broken teeth. At the ranch. Paying off your last 2 months. After you ran away, someone had to complete the contract, didn't they? Ruth pressed the barrel of the rifle against his temple. If she has a scratch, you what? You'll kill me? I'm already dead, witch. Broken leg, ruined reputation, half my men down. But your little sister. She's beautiful. Hair red as fire. My men are enjoying... Ezra held Ruth back before she could pull the trigger. No, not like this. He wants you to become a murderer. Don't give him that gift. Ruth trembled, then lowered the weapon. She spat in Brennan's face. Caleb, Ezra turned. Take him to Cedar Ridge. Wheeler will arrest him for attempted murder and armed assault. With these written confessions, he won't be getting out of prison anytime soon. And the sister? Caleb asked. We're going to get her, Ruth said. Now. As Brennan was dragged away, cursing and threatening, Ruth returned to the cabin. She reloaded her weapons with hands that no longer trembled. She tied up her hair. She straightened her shoulders. Ezra saw in her then, no longer the woman with a sack on her head being auctioned off. He saw a warrior. He saw an avenger. He saw a sister who would march through hell to save her own blood. Ready? He asked. I was born ready, Ruth replied. Let's bring Ada home. And as they rode down the trail toward the Double Cross Ranch, Ezra realized that for the first time in 7 years, he felt something beyond emptiness. He felt purpose. He felt righteous anger. He felt that saving Ruth had not been the end of the story. It had only been the beginning. The Double Cross Ranch spread out like an open wound in the valley, with broken fences and buildings that seemed to be rotting even as they stood. Without Brennan, the place was falling apart, his henchmen fighting for control like vultures squabbling over a carcass. Ezra, Ruth, and Caleb with 4 hunters arrived before dawn. A low fog concealed their movements. Ruth didn't wait for a plan. She ran towards the main house like a released arrow, with Ezra and Caleb running after her. They found Ada in the cellar, locked up, too thin, her skin as pale as milk, her red hair tangled. But her eyes, light green, vibrant, lit up when she saw Ruth. Ruth! Her voice was hoarse from disuse. You came. Always. Ruth cut the ropes that bound Ada's wrists. I would always come. I'm sorry it took so long. The sisters embraced, crying silently. Ezra stood guard, giving them the privacy of their reunion. That's when Wyatt Calhoun, the brutal foreman who had helped Brennan in his cruelties, appeared at the top of the stairs, a rifle in his hands. Did you think you could steal property from... The bullet interrupted him. It didn't come from Ruth or Ezra. It came from Martha Yates, the 50-something housekeeper who had worked on this ranch for 22 years, seeing horrors and carrying silences. She came down the stairs, a hunting rifle still smoking, her face as serene as a windless lake. 22 years watching the devil wear human skin, she said calmly. It ends today. Calhoun will be locked in his own cellar until the marshal arrives. She turned to Ruth. I'm coming with you. I have nothing left here, and you need someone who cooks better than survivors. Ruth embraced the woman who, in her years of servitude, had been the only one to show small kindnesses. Extra bread when Brennan wasn't looking, ointment for wounds, whispered words of encouragement. Come, you're welcome. Martha brought something more precious than her company. Documents. Years of records that Brennan had kept, confident in his impunity. Forced contracts of other people. Records of stolen land. Evidence of a commissioned murder. This will destroy not only Brennan, Martha said as they rode back. It will destroy his entire legacy. And it did. In the spring of 1879, Silas Brennan was tried in Denver, sentenced to 25 years in the territorial prison. His lands were auctioned off to pay reparations to the victims. Ruth, with money that Ezra had saved from his years of work, bought 200 acres of that land. This land broke me, she said, holding the deed. Now it belongs to me, and I will turn it into a place of healing, not pain. Ada recovered slowly. Martha became the mother neither of the sisters had had. Ezra expanded the cabin, now a real house with separate rooms, privacy, and dignity. And as the winter melted into spring, as wildflowers exploded in impossible colors through the retreating snow, something more delicate also blossomed. Trust, family, the understanding that chosen bonds are as strong as blood ties. Perhaps stronger, because they are forged in conscious choice, not in the accident of birth. One night, While Martha was teaching Ada to read better, Ruth and Ezra sat on the new porch watching the sun die behind the peaks. "Thank you," Ruth said softly. "For what?" "For believing that I was worth more than $12. For giving me a choice when the world had only given me chains. For making my sister free when I couldn't. For everything." Ezra held her hand, calloused and strong, a survivor's hand. "You were always worth more than any price. You just needed a chance to prove it. To yourself, more than to anyone else." Ruth rested her head on his shoulder, not romantically, but with an intimacy deeper than romance, the intimacy of two souls who had walked through fire and emerged not without scars, but unharmed where it matters. "Do you think Brennan will stay in prison? With Martha's evidence? He'll die there." A pause. "But even if he didn't, you're no longer the woman he knew. You are free. And freedom, once truly felt, cannot be imprisoned again." Ruth smiled, her first true smile, not marked by pain or cynicism but by genuine hope. And at that moment, as the stars began to pierce the darkening sky, she knew the storm had a name. But she also had a name now. Not property, not merchandise, but Ruth Cole, and that name meant free. The summer of 1879 brought an unexpected visitor. Benjamin Brennan arrived in July, riding up the trail with the posture of someone unaccustomed to mountains. 32 years old, clothes too fine for Colorado, reading glasses hanging from his vest pocket. A schoolteacher from Boston, they later discovered. Ruth saw him from the window and instinctively grabbed her rifle. "Brennan," she spat the name like poison. "Wait," Ezra touched her arm. "He comes alone. No weapons that I can see. Let's at least listen." Benjamin dismounted with difficulty, clearly not spending much time on horseback, and removed his hat. "Mrs. Cole, Mr. Cole." His voice was polite, Eastern, without the harsh accent of the West. "I know my surname brings only bad memories, but I ask for a few minutes of your time. I have something that I believe will be of interest to you." Ruth did not lower her rifle. Martha, who had joined them, studied the young man with experienced eyes. "He doesn't have Silas's eyes," she murmured. "He doesn't have the cruelty." They allowed him to enter, although Ruth kept her distance and her weapon close. Benjamin explained, a distant cousin of Silas, raised in the East by his mother after his father died. He had never met Silas personally, only by his bad reputation. When he learned of the conviction, he came to Colorado to settle legal matters. "And I found this." He took a worn-out diary from his pocket. Silas's diary, found by his lawyer. It reveals that he buried $8,000 in gold somewhere in these mountains before being arrested, fearing confiscation. "By the law of succession, the gold is mine." A pause. "But it's on land that was his and is now yours, Mrs. Cole." Ruth narrowed her eyes. "And what do you want? Permission to search?" "I propose a partnership. We split it 50-50 if we find it. You know the lands. I have the diary with clues. Together maybe we can do it. Or maybe this is a trap. A Brennan is a Brennan, true." Benjamin did not deny it. "But I'm a teacher, not a thief. I brought legal documents. We can make a contract if you prefer." A small smile. "And unlike my cousin, I actually respect contracts." Ada, who had been quiet until then, approached. She studied Benjamin with interest. 19 years old now. Physically recovered, although the emotional scars were still healing, she had developed a sharp instinct for human character. "He's not lying," she said softly. "I can feel it. Not everyone born with a bad surname is bad." Ruth looked surprised at her sister. Then at Ezra, he shrugged. The man came alone, unarmed, with a reasonable proposition. "We can try. But," he turned to Benjamin, "you stay in Cedar Ridge, not here. And any sign of betrayal—" "I understand perfectly." Benjamin nodded. "And I accept the terms." Thus began the most unlikely treasure hunt. For 3 months, they followed the encrypted clues in the diary. Benjamin proved to be an honest worker, respectful of the women, patient with Ruth's distrust. Kauta became his guide, teaching him about the mountain's medicinal plants, safe trails, how to read weather signs. Ezra watched the young man develop, from the attempted gentility of the East to a genuine appreciation for the harshness and beauty of the West. And he also watched how Ada and Benjamin talked, at length about books she had never read, about a world she had never seen, about possibilities she had never considered. "He likes her," Martha commented one night. "And she likes him," Ruth added with a surprising lack of anger. "It's strange. Weeks ago I would have shot him just for his surname. Now, I see a person, not a family name, because you've learned the difference between judgment and justice," Ezra said. "Judging is easy. Justice requires us to see nuances." On October 23rd, Ada found it. 3 pine trees marked with a discreet X near a tributary stream. They dug, 6 feet deep. an iron chest. When they opened it, the gold shone in the afternoon sun. $8,400 in coins. Benjamin took a deep breath. A fortune that would change anyone's life. 50-50, he said. As agreed. But that night when they divided the coins, he made a different proposal. You keep 5,500. I'll take 2,900. He raised his hand when Ruth began to protest. You suffered at the hands of my cousin. Ada deserves a dowry if she ever wants to marry. Martha deserves security in her old age. And you, Mr. and Mrs. Cole, have taught me that wealth is not gold. It's character. Let me pay for that lesson. Ruth was speechless. Then slowly she extended her hand. I accept. But with a condition: you are welcome here always. Family is not just blood. Family is a choice. Benjamin shook her hand, and when his eyes met Ada's, something passed between them that everyone saw but no one commented on. Hope, possibility, the suggestion that even from the most rotten legacy, new life can grow. The gold turned possibilities into realities. Ezra and Ruth built a real house. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, a wide porch that wrapped around the entire front. Not a mansion, but a solid home that promised permanence. They bought another 150 adjacent acres. They started breeding mountain horses, a hardy breed perfect for miners who needed animals that wouldn't die at altitude. Ruth opened Ruth Cole's House of Cures in Cedar Ridge, a small shop where she sold medicinal herbs, tinctures and ointments that she prepared. Her witch's mark, her different eyes, became her strength. Eyes that see differently see what others don't, she would say to hesitant customers. Trust the double vision. And they trusted. Slowly, the woman who had been auctioned off as defective merchandise became a respected healer. Mothers brought children with coughs. Miners sought remedies for damaged lungs. Even Reverend Hayes, who had initially called her possessed, came to ask for treatment for his arthritis. Ada flourished, 21 years old, with a natural talent for medicine that surpassed even Ruth's. And Benjamin visited monthly, always with excuses. Checking on the lands, bringing books for Ada, asking Ezra's advice on horses. But everyone knew the truth. In December 1880, he asked Ada to marry him, formally in the living room of the new house, kneeling before her with a simple but honest ring. I don't have much to offer besides love and respect, he said, but I promise to never treat you as property. I promise to see you as a partner. I promise that your dreams will be as important as mine. Ada cried, then laughed, then said yes. Ruth, watching, felt a mixture of joy and melancholy. Her little sister, whom she had saved from hell, would now fly. As it should be. Roots exist to allow wings to grow. Martha knitted in her rocking chair, smiling. Ezra touched Ruth's shoulder gently. She'll be fine, he murmured. Benjamin is a good man. I know, Ruth wiped her tears. It's just, she was my responsibility for so long. My reason to survive when survival seemed impossible. And now she has her own life. And so do you. Ruth turned to look at him. Really look at him. Ezra, at 46, was still strong, though grey hairs streaked his temples. His eyes, once dead with pain, now carried a warmth she had come to depend on. My own life, she repeated. Yes, I suppose so. He held her hand. Not as an owner holds property, but as a partner holds a partner. Ruth Cole, we've spent 2 years building a house, a business, a family. We've built everything except one thing. What? Us, simple, direct, you and me. This marriage started as legal protection, but it became something more. For me, at least. And I wonder if... Ruth placed her fingers on his lips, silencing him. Her different eyes, brown and amber green, shone with an emotion she had learned not to fear. It became something more for me, too, she admitted. Not the romantic love of books, but something deeper. Respect, trust, partnership. The certainty that when I wake up, I'm not alone, and that when I sleep, I'm safe. A pause. Is it love? I don't know. I've never known real love to compare, but it's precious. It's enough. It's mine. Ezra gently pulled her into a hug. Not possessive, just protective. And Ruth, who had spent 10 years refusing human touch, relaxed against him. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again. Winter was coming. But inside the house they had built, a fire burned warm, a family gathered, and 2 survivors discovered that broken hearts can, with patience and kindness, learn to beat again. Not without scars. Scars would always remain, but scars prove that wounds can heal, and healing, not perfection, is all that broken souls really need. The spring of 1881 brought more than flowers. It brought new life in a way that no one expected. Ruth first noticed it in the mornings. Nausea that didn't come from bad food, tiredness that didn't come from hard work. At 39, she had assumed that that possibility had died along with her many hopes during her 10 years of servitude. But life, she discovered, is stubborn. Dr. Owen Sutherland, the doctor who had treated her injuries years ago, confirmed it. Pregnant. 4 months, maybe 5. It's a high-risk pregnancy, Mrs. Cole, he said gently. At your age, with a history of... He hesitated. With a history of severe physical trauma, we'll need to monitor you carefully. Ruth nodded. Fear was not an unknown emotion, but it was not controlling either. She had survived worse things than childbirth. Ezra, when she told him, turned pale. He sat down heavily. Clara, he murmured. Clara died. Tuberculosis, yes, but the second child we tried to have weakened her. And she... He looked at Ruth with naked terror. I can't lose you too. Ruth knelt before him, held his face in her hands. Ezra Cole, look at me. I survived 10 years of hell. I survived beatings, hunger, cold. I survived being sold like cattle. I survived a war to save my sister. Her different eyes burned with a fierce determination. I'm not going to die bringing life. Not after I've seen so much death. Ada postponed her wedding to stay close. Benjamin understands, she said when Ruth protested. Family first. Always family first. Martha took over the House of Cures in Cedar Ridge, freeing Ruth to rest. Ezra almost completely stopped working with the horses, staying close to home, watching, worrying. The months passed. Summer ripened. Ruth's belly grew. She felt life moving inside her. Small punches, turns, hiccups. A tiny miracle making itself known. Do you want a boy or a girl? Ada asked one day as they sewed tiny clothes. I want healthy, Ruth replied. Anything beyond that is a luxury. December arrived with a fierce snowstorm, and with it, labor. 18 hours. Dr. Sutherland worked with sweat bathing his face despite the cold. Ada watched, learning, helping. Martha prayed in a low voice. Ezra paced outside the house, unable to stand still, unable to go inside and see Ruth in pain. When the baby's cry finally pierced the night, he almost fell from relief. Ada opened the door, tears streaming down her face. A girl, small but strong, she smiled. And Ruth is fine. Tired but fine. Ezra entered with trembling legs. Ruth was pale, exhausted. Her hair stuck to her forehead, but her eyes shone. And in her arms, wrapped in a quilt that Martha had made, was the baby. Dark brown hair. Eyes still the blue of a newborn, but one already showed a different touch, as if even at birth the girl carried a special mark of her mother. Clara, Ruth whispered. I want to name her Clara Ruth Cole. Clara in honor of your first wife. Ruth, well, a small tired smile. So she never forgets she came from a mother who fought for freedom. Ezra knelt beside the bed. He touched the baby's tiny head with reverence. Then, for the first time in 8 years, since he had buried Clara, he cried, not tears of pain, tears of gratitude, tears of relief, tears of a man who thought that happiness had died and discovered that it was only sleeping, waiting for the right moment to awaken. 2 women gave me a reason to live, he said through his tears. Now both are in her name. Ruth pulled him into an awkward hug, the baby safe between them. Ada and Martha watched from the door, their own eyes moist. Outside, the snow continued to fall. But inside that house, the warmth of something more precious than fire warmed them. Family. Not born of blood alone, but consciously chosen, built on a foundation of respect, sacrifice, and love that did not shout, but whispered with the strength of a mountain. Clara Ruth Cole cried again, her voice tiny but surprisingly strong. And in that cry they all heard a promise. Life goes on, even after trauma, even after loss. Life persists, stubborn and beautiful, and no matter how broken we are, we can still create something whole. The spring of 1882 brought changes. Clara, now 3 months old, was growing quickly. Her eyes were beginning to define themselves, one a dark brown like wet earth, the other an amber green with golden flecks. Heterochromia like her mother, a mark of uniqueness that Ruth hoped would, in the future, be seen as a blessing and not a curse. Ada and Benjamin finally married in March, a simple ceremony in Cedar Ridge, with Reverend Hayes officiating. Ruth was the maid of honor, holding a peacefully sleeping Clara. Ezra was the best man. Caleb Stone and his family attended. Martha cried happy tears. Even Samuel Morrison, the blacksmith, came with his wife, bringing a gift, a set of surgical tools he had forged for Ada, knowing she would study medicine. I'll save lives with these, he said, holding the young woman's hands. Just as your sister saved my conscience when she reminded me that silence in the face of cruelty is cowardice. Ada hugged him. Then she turned to the small congregation. Everyone here in one way or another is my family. Not because we were born related, but because we chose to be related. She looked at Benjamin. And now I choose this man, who has proven that a surname does not define destiny. They would move to Denver. Benjamin wanted to expand his school, including education for poor girls. a radical but necessary project. Ada would study medicine formally, under the tutelage of a renowned doctor, whom Benjamin had met through his Eastern connections. "I'll visit every summer," Ada promised Ruth as they said goodbye. "And you'll come when you can. And Clara will know her aunt, and—" "Ada," Ruth interrupted her gently, "it's all right. You don't need to justify yourself. Fly. That's what I fought so hard for. So you could fly." The sisters embraced. An 8-year age difference, but a bond forged in the fire of shared suffering. When they finally separated, they were both crying. "I love you," Ada whispered. "I love you too, little sister," Ruth replied. "Now go change the world." In May, news arrived that none of them expected. Silas Brennan had died in prison. Typhoid fever. Not a dramatic death, just miserable and slow. Marshall Wheeler brought the news personally. "I thought you'd like to know," he said, standing on the porch of the Coles house. "Foreclosure." Ruth received the news with a neutral expression. "Then I feel nothing," she admitted. "He was already dead to me. He died when I left that ranch, when I refused to be defined by what he did to me." She looked at Martha, who had joined them. "Do you feel anything?" Martha shook her head. "Only relief that the world has one less predator." Ezra put his arm around Ruth. "Some men die long before their bodies stop. He was one of them. He died when he lost the power to hurt you." That night, Ruth wrote in a diary she had started to keep. Martha had taught her to write better. "Brennan is dead, and I realize that he has become so insignificant in my life that his death is just a footnote. He stole 10 years. But he didn't define my whole story. I did, with the help of people who saw value where he saw only merchandise. This is the greatest victory, not that he died, but that I lived, truly lived. And I continue to live." She closed the diary. Clara was sleeping in a cradle that Ezra had built, her soft breathing filling the room. Ruth touched her daughter's hair, still marveling at this tiny being that was half her, half Ezra, but completely her own. "You will have a different life," she whispered. "You will grow up knowing that you are loved, that your choices matter, that the marks that make you different are gifts, not curses. I promise you this." Ezra appeared at the door. "Talking to her again?" "Always," Ruth smiled. "I need her to know from an early age that she has a voice, that she deserves to be heard. She'll know." Ezra approached, wrapped Ruth from behind, both of them looking at their sleeping daughter. "How could she not, with you as her mother?" Ruth relaxed against him. Their marriage had never been conventional. It had started as a legal transaction. It had become a partnership, then a deep friendship. And now, love. Not the kind of love from fairy tales, but a mature love built on mutual trust and respect. "I love you," she said, words that still came out with hesitation, as if she feared that saying them would destroy them. "I know." Ezra kissed her hair. "And I love you too. I always have. From the moment I saw you hold your head high on that platform, even with a sack covering your face. I saw strength. I saw dignity. I saw a soul that refused to break. And I knew that if I met only one truly brave person in my life, it would be you." Ruth turned in his arms. Her different eyes shone with unshed tears. "You saved my life." "No," Ezra corrected her gently. "You saved your own. I just paid for the ticket." And he kissed her. Not with desperate passion, but with deep tenderness. A kiss that promised, "I see you. I choose you. Today, tomorrow, always." Outside, spring was blooming in the mountains. And inside the house, love was blooming too, quiet, strong, and as eternal as the peaks that watched over them. The following years unfolded like a gentle river, not without challenges. The winter of 1883 was brutal. They lost half their horses to disease. The House of Cures was almost destroyed by fire. But they overcame, together. Clara grew up vibrant and curious. At 3, she followed Ezra everywhere, asking about every horse, every tree, every bird. At 5, she helped Ruth with medicinal herbs, learning their names and uses. Her small hands touched the plants with a reverence that her mother had taught her. Kada visited every summer, bringing Isaac, now 2 years old. Then came Sarah, then Ruby, 3 children who filled the house with laughter. Benjamin prospered in Denver, his school growing from 40 to 120 students, including many girls revolutionary for the time. Martha aged gracefully. At 78, she finally stopped working, content to knit on the porch and tell stories to the children. Her hands, once so skilled, trembled with arthritis, but her mind remained sharp. "I've lived to see the impossible," she said one afternoon with Ruth sitting beside her. An enslaved woman become a respected healer, a traumatized girl become a doctor, a house built on a foundation of compassion, not cruelty. "If I died tomorrow, I would die happy." "Don't talk like that," Ruth protested. "It's not morbid, child. It's gratitude." Martha touched her hand. You gave me a family when I thought I would die alone and bitter. That is a gift beyond price. The Cole property became a landmark in Colorado. People came from neighboring towns to buy Ezra's horses. They came for Ruth's remedies. But more than that, they came because it was a place known for kindness, where lonely travelers were fed, where refugees found advice, where broken people learned that rebuilding was possible. In 1888, a journalist from Harper's Weekly visited for an article on pioneer women of the West. He interviewed Ruth in her house of cures. "How does it feel, Mrs. Cole, to have been bought for $12 and today be worth so much?" Ruth looked out the window, at the mountains that had sheltered her when the world had rejected her. She thought of Ezra, now 54 but still strong. She thought of Clara, 6 years old and with eyes that saw the world through double perspectives. She thought of Ada, achieving impossible dreams in Denver. She thought of Martha, living her final days. "I wasn't bought," she finally replied. "I was freed. There's a difference. That man didn't pay for me. He paid for my chance to live, to really live, not just survive. And I've spent every day since then proving that those $12 were the wisest investment he could have made." "And your husband? How would you describe him?" Ruth smiled. Not the small, cautious smile of her early days, but a wide, genuine smile. "Ezra Cole is a man who understands that strength is not in controlling, but in freeing. That love is not in possessing, but in honoring. He gave me the most precious gift, choice. And I chose to stay. I chose to love him. I chose to build a life with him. And that choice, freely made every day, is what makes everything real." The article was published in October 1888. It brought a little fame. Some letters arrived, some visitors. But mostly it brought validation. Their story mattered, not just to them, but to others who needed to know that redemption was possible. Clara learned to read at 4. At 7, she was already reading the legal contracts that Ruth received, pointing out unfair clauses. "Mommy, this says that a woman can't own property alone," she said indignantly. "That's wrong." "Yes," Ruth agreed. "It is. Then why does it exist?" "Because the world was built by men who were afraid of losing power. But worlds can be rebuilt. And you, my special-eyed daughter, you will help to rebuild it." Clara nodded, serious beyond her years. "I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to change these laws." Ruth hugged her. "I know you will. And your mother, who once didn't even have a voice to say no, will be proud of every victory of yours." Ezra, listening from the door, felt his heart ache with love. His original Clara had given him companionship. His second Clara, the wife who had started as a stranger in a dusty square, had given him purpose. And his third Clara, the daughter he never expected to have, gave him hope for the future. 3 Claras, 3 forms of love, each one essential in transforming him from a man who didn't smile into a man who laughed daily. June 1889. Clara was 6.5 years old when Reverend Hayes finally came up the mountain for her late baptism. The Reverend had changed in the years since the auction. Witnessing Ruth's transformation from a condemned witch to a respected healer had challenged his certainties. He had learned that holiness did not come only from churches, but from daily actions. That miracles happened not in grandiose rituals, but in small kindnesses accumulated over time. The property was full. Ada and Benjamin came from Denver with their 3 children, Caleb Stone and his whole family. Marshall Wheeler, retired now but still respected. Dr. Sutherland, Samuel Morrison and his wife, Martha, in a wheelchair that Ezra had built. Dozens of families from the mountains, people whom Ezra and Ruth had helped over the years. Even Luther Briggs, the man who had auctioned Ruth, came. Briggs approached her before the ceremony, his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Cole," his voice was choked, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I have to ask what I did." He shook his head. "I've lived with that day for all these years, seeing your dignity, your posture, and knowing that I was—" He couldn't finish. Ruth looked at him for a long moment. Her different eyes showed no anger, only the weariness of carrying resentment. "Mr. Briggs, forgiveness is not for you, it's for me, so that I don't carry your weight beyond the years I've already carried it. So yes, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve the freedom to let it go." He cried openly. He thanked her. He walked away. Ezra approached Ruth. "That was generous." "It was necessary," Ruth corrected. "I learned that carrying hatred is like carrying embers. You burn yourself, not the one you hate." The ceremony took place in the backyard, with a view of the Rocky Mountain peaks shining in the sun. Reverend Hayes baptized Clara with water from a mountain spring. "Clara Ruth Cole, I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. May you grow in grace, strength, and love. May your differences be your strengths. May your life be a testament that redemption is always possible. Clara looked with big eyes, one brown, one amber green, at everyone gathered. Then she smiled, a radiant smile that lit up her whole face. After the ceremony, as people ate and talked, Ezra pulled Ruth aside, away from the crowd. Do you remember when you asked me years ago what you were to me? I remember. And if I ask you now, what am I to you? Ruth looked at the house they had built, at the land they owned, at the daughter playing with her cousins, at the chosen family gathered in celebration, at the years that had unfolded since that cold morning in the Cedar Ridge Square. You are my second chance, my proof that the world can be kind. You are a partner who respects instead of controlling, a father whom our daughter will adore instead of fear. She touched his face. You are the man who paid $12 not to buy but to free. And if there is a greater love than that, I don't know it. Ezra held her hand. And you are my salvation, not because you saved me from something external, but because you saved me from myself, from the loneliness I chose, from the pain I cultivated, from the oblivion I sought. You reminded me that living is different from existing. He looked at Clara, laughing as Isaac tried to teach her how to skip stones in the stream. And you gave me a reason to smile again. Martha watched from the corner. Ada was by her side. They found something rare, Ada murmured. They didn't find it, Martha corrected. They built it, day after day, choice after choice. Love isn't found, child. It's forged. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in pink and gold. The mountains rose eternal, silent witnesses to everything that had happened in these 11 years. From auction to freedom, from shame to dignity, from loneliness to family. Caleb Stone raised a mug in a toast to the man of the mountain who saw value where others saw defect, and to the woman who turned $12 into the most profitable investment in Colorado. Everyone laughed. They toasted. They celebrated not just a baptism, but the miracle of lives rebuilt from the wreckage. And when night finally fell, stars pierced the sky like shining promises. Ruth and Ezra sat on the porch, Clara sleeping between them. Do you believe in destiny? Ruth asked softly. No, Ezra replied. I believe in choices, and I thank every day for the choice I made in that square. And I'm thankful that I was brave enough to accept a stranger's hand instead of running. Ruth rested her head on his shoulder. Funny how the most terrifying moments of our lives can become the most important. Clara stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Ruth caressed her hair. What do you think she'll be? Whatever she chooses to be, Ezra said, because she will have the freedom to choose. That is our legacy to her. Not gold, not land, but freedom. And at that moment, under ancient stars and eternal mountains, two survivors held the evidence that even from the worst beginnings, beautiful endings can blossom. 20 years passed like the waters of a river, sometimes turbulent, sometimes serene, but always moving forward. It was 1898. Ruth was 56, her silver hair shining in the sun, the scar on her face faded but present, a reminder of who she had been and how far she had come. Ezra, 64, still trained horses, though more slowly now with the help of young apprentices. Martha had died peacefully in her sleep in 1895, at the age of 85. Her last request had been to be buried on the Cole property, where I finally knew happiness. Ezra had built a simple but beautiful headstone. Martha Yates, 1810-1895, who saw darkness but chose light. Clara, now 16, had returned from a school in Denver where Ada had sponsored her. Tall like her mother, with heterochromatic eyes shining with intelligence, she had declared her intention. I'm going to be a lawyer. I will defend women trapped in contracts that steal their lives. I will change the laws that treat half of humanity as property. Ruth, listening, felt a pride so intense it almost hurt. You will do it. And when you do, every woman you free will be a tribute to the 10 years I lost. You will turn my pain into someone else's purpose. Ada prospered in Denver. 3 grown children, a respected medical practice where she treated patients regardless of their ability to pay. Benjamin ran a school with 120 students, including the first entire class of girls studying mathematics and science. The Cole property had become a legend, the place where love conquered slavery, people said, where a strange-eyed woman became the wisest healer in the territory. In September 1898, a journalist returned, the same one from Harper's Weekly, now doing a follow-up article. 20 years later, Mrs. Cole, how would you summarize this journey? Ruth sat on the porch that had known so many dawns, so many sunsets. She looked at the mountains that had embraced her when the world had rejected her. At the house they had built with their own hands and determined hearts. At Ezra, his hair completely white now, but his eyes still kind, talking with Clara about legal contracts. 20 years ago I was on a platform with a sack on my head, being sold as merchandise. Today I'm a landowner, a respected healer, the mother of a brilliant daughter, the wife of a man who proved that kindness still exists. A pause. But the journey was not magical. It was hard work. It was choosing every day not to be defined by what was done to me, but by what I chose to become. And the $12? How do you feel about them now? Ruth smiled, the scar pulling slightly at her cheek. $12 bought a moment, but the following years, we built those. Ezra and I, Ada, Martha, everyone who chose to see humanity where others saw only a mark or merchandise. She touched her heart. It wasn't the $12 that saved me. It was deciding that I deserved salvation. That was the real liberation. Clara joined them, bringing lemonade she had just made. Mommy, there's a letter from Ada. Isaac has been accepted into a medical school in Boston. He'll be the first of his generation to study in the East. Ruth read the letter, tears of joy shining. The nephew she had known as a baby would now follow in his mother's. Medical footsteps. Circles close, she murmured. Ada saves lives because someone saved her. Isaac will save them because he was raised knowing that having power is having the responsibility to use it well. Ezra approached, placed a hand on Ruth's shoulder. Are you all right? I'm whole, she corrected. There's a difference between being all right and being whole. All right is the absence of pain. Whole is the presence of purpose. And finally, after 56 years in this world, I have found my purpose. The journalist wrote down her words with reverence. Then he asked, and you, Mr. Cole, have you ever regretted those $12? Ezra looked at Ruth, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time again. Not the woman with a sack on her head on a platform of shame, but the partner who had built an empire of compassion by his side, the mother of his daughter. The reason he woke up smiling. Regret? He repeated. No, those were the wisest $12 I ever spent. I bought salt, flour and coffee that day too. Those are long gone. But what did those $12 really bring? He gestured to everything around them. This, family, purpose, love that I didn't know I was still capable of feeling. A pause. If I could go back to that morning, I would do it all over again. Without hesitation, Clara watched her parents with eyes that saw through two perspectives, literally and figuratively. She had learned from an early age that the world was not simple, that truth had layers, that justice required a view from multiple angles. You two taught me the greatest lesson, she said softly, that we are defined not by what happens to us, but by how we respond. Mommy could have become bitter, cruel, closed off, but she chose to heal. Daddy could have remained on the mountain, avoiding humanity, but he chose to engage. She looked at both of them. Those choices taught me that we always have a choice about who we become. The journalist closed his notebook. This story deserves to be told, not just as a curiosity of the West, but as a testament to what humanity can be when it chooses compassion over convention. After he left, the family stayed on the porch watching the sun go down in a glory of crimson and gold behind the peaks. The mountains, eternal and indifferent to human dramas, silently witnessed another day on the Cole property. Mother, Clara broke the silence, when I find contracts like the one that bound you, when I defend women who are still treated as property, can I tell your story? Ruth hesitated. For years she had kept the darkest details, the beatings, the hunger, the nights when she had wished to die but had chosen to live for Ada. But now, yes, she decided, tell it, tell everything, because the shame is not mine. It belongs to the system that allowed it. And if my story, however painful, helps another woman understand that she is not alone, that there is a path to freedom, then it's worth every difficult moment of remembering. Clara hugged her mother. A silent promise. Your pain will not be wasted. It will be transformed into justice for others. Ezra wrapped them both in a hug. My strong women, he murmured. My first Clara taught me to love. My Ruth taught me that love means freeing, not binding. And my little Clara will teach me that a legacy is not in gold or land, but in the lives we touch and change. That night, after Clara had fallen asleep, Ruth and Ezra remained on the porch under a starry sky. Are you afraid? Ezra asked. Of what comes next? No, Ruth answered honestly. I've lived through the worst the world can do. I survived. More than survived, I flourished. Whatever comes, we will face it as we have faced everything. Together. Ezra held her hand, still calloused after decades of work. Hands that had healed, that had built, that had sustained life. Do you know what I realized? He said softly. That morning in the square when I offered those $12, I thought I was saving you. But the truth is you saved me. You took me out of the mountain, where I had buried my heart along with Clara. You taught me that starting over is not betraying the past. It's honoring it by continuing to live. So we saved each other, Ruth concluded. And that, I think, is the truest definition of love. Not depending on each other, but lifting each other up. A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind of silence that only decades together can create, where words are not necessary because understanding is too deep for language. A wolf howled in the distance. A sound that had once terrified Ruth now comforted her. It was the sound of the mountain, of home, of the place where she belonged. Ezra Cole, she finally said, thank you for seeing a person under that sack, for seeing value where others saw a defect, for giving me not just legal freedom, but the true freedom to discover who I really was. Ruth Cole, he replied. Thank you for trusting a stranger when all your experience had taught you distrust, for staying when you could have left, for building a life with me when you had every reason to never trust a man again. They kissed, not with the urgency of youth, but with the certainty of age. A kiss that said, I choose you, today, tomorrow, until the mountains crumbled to dust. Inside the house, a framed photograph hung on the living room wall, Ruth and Ezra on their real wedding day in 1882, she without a sack on her head, he finally smiling. And underneath, an engraved plaque that Ezra had commissioned, Cole House, Esther, 1878. Where broken souls built something whole, the years would continue to pass. Clara would become the first female lawyer in Colorado, specializing in women's rights. She would rewrite the contracts that still bound women to servitude. She would defend the voices that were not heard. And in every victory, she would honor the 10 lost years of her mother. Ada would continue to save lives in Denver, her 3 children following in service professions, Isaac as a doctor, Sarah as a teacher, Ruby as a nurse. Benjamin would expand his school until it became a model for equal education throughout the territory. Caleb Stone and his mountain hunters would tell the story of the battle where they defended the Cole property, turning it into a legend. And Cedar Ridge, the small town that had once auctioned a woman-like merchandise, would slowly learn that human value cannot be measured in dollars. That dignity is not granted by paper or position, that the strongest people are those who survive the impossible and choose not to become the monsters that hurt them. But at that moment, under indifferent stars and eternal mountains, 2 people whom fate had thrown together in the cruelest way possible simply held each other, grateful, whole, free. The wind from the Rocky Mountains blew softly, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. It also carried a promise that even from the darkest beginnings light can emerge, that even the most broken hearts can learn to love again. That $12, spent with compassion instead of greed, can change not just one life, but generations. And as Ruth and Ezra finally went inside to sleep, their hands intertwined, the spirits of all who had helped them along the way, the first Clara, Martha, the mountain hunters, even Luther Briggs, who found redemption in repentance, seemed to whisper through the wind, well done, well lived, well loved. It was all any soul could hope for. 20 years later, in 1918, Clara Cole Henderson, she had married but kept her mother's surname, was speaking at the state convention on women's rights in Colorado. At 36, the same age her mother had been when she was auctioned, Clara had become a powerful voice for change. She had successfully advocated for the abolition of forced servitude contracts in the state. She had helped draft legislation that guaranteed married women the right to own property. She had represented dozens of women in disputes against abusive employers. And now, before a packed auditorium, she was telling the story she had carried her whole life. My mother was sold in a public square for $12. Her hands were tied, a sack was on her head, and she had every reason to give up on humanity. But one man, my father, saw not merchandise but a person, and with those $12 he bought not a woman, but a chance. A chance for her to discover that she was worth infinitely more than any price. A chance for her to rebuild a life that violence had tried to destroy. Her voice resonated through the hall, firm and clear. Today, 35 years later, I ask you, how many Ruths are still out there? How many women are bound not by ropes but by unjust laws? How many are waiting for someone to offer not charity, but justice? A pause. My mother always said that she was not saved by $12. She was saved by a conscious choice to refuse to remain a victim. But she needed an opportunity to make that choice. And that is what we must offer. Not salvation, but opportunity. Not pity, but justice. The crowd rose in a standing ovation, but Clara did not smile triumphantly. She just nodded, thinking of Ruth, who, now 76, was living her final years in peace on the property she had helped to build. That same night, Clara sent a telegram. Mother, stop, told your story, stop, they listened. Stop, change is coming, stop. Your suffering was not in vain. Stop. Ruth, receiving the telegram, held it to her chest. Tears ran down her wrinkled face, down the faded scar that remained as a silent witness. Ezra, now 84, frail but present, sat beside her. She did it, Ruth whispered. Our girl turned pain into purpose. Like mother, like daughter. Ezra touched her face gently. You taught her well. Ruth looked out the window at the mountains that had embraced her when the world had rejected her. She thought of the impossible path she had traveled, from auctioned merchandise to respected healer, from a nameless woman to the matriarch of a family that was changing the world. It was worth it, she finally said. Every moment of pain, every scar, every tear, it was all worth it because it led to this. To Clara changing laws, to Ada saving lives, to generations who will never know the servitude that I knew. She looked at Ezra, and it led to you, to this love that proved that kindness still exists. Ezra kissed her forehead. Rest now, my love. You've fought long enough. You won. You can rest. Ruth closed her eyes, the telegram still safe in her hands. And for the first time in 7 decades, she felt complete peace. Not because there was no more injustice in the world, but because she knew she was leaving warriors, Clara, Ada, her grandchildren, to continue the fight. 2 years later, in 1920, Ruth Cole passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. Ezra followed her 6 months later. At 86, they were buried side by side on the property they loved, under the mountains that had witnessed their impossible journey. The headstones, simple but beautiful, read, Ruth Ann Cole, 1842-1920. Freed by $12. Saved herself by her own courage, Ezra Cole. 34, 1920. Who saw value where others saw a defect. Best investment. Compassion. The Cole property remained in the family for generations. It became a historical landmark in 1950, a museum in 1975, a place of pilgrimage for all who believed that one person, one act, one moment of compassionate choice can change the course of history. And at the entrance to the museum, a bronze plaque tells the story. Here in 1878, Ezra Cole offered $12 not to buy a woman, but to free her. Ruth Cole accepted not out of obligation, but out of the courage to believe that a better future was possible. Together they built a legacy of compassion that resonates to this day. May their story remind us, we are defined not by the chains that bind us, but by the strength with which we break them. And so, through decades and generations, the story of the $12 continued to live on, not as a fairy tale of romantic salvation, but as a testament to something deeper, that human dignity cannot be bought or sold, that true freedom comes from within, that genuine love does not bind but frees, and that sometimes all a broken soul needs is not to be saved, but to be seen, truly seen, as the person of infinite value they always were. The $12 opened a door, but it was Ruth and Ezra, with daily choices of respect, trust, and love, who built a house on the other side of that door. And that house, built on a foundation of compassion and supported by pillars of free choice, remained standing long after its builders were gone. Because the best buildings are not of wood and stone, they are of legacy and love, and those last forever.